100 cars gone in under a minute each. No tools, no forced entry, not a single clue left behind. How did a former Chinese intelligence officer pull off the perfect heist on American soil? Meet Min Jinyang, the mastermind behind the largest car theft operation in U.S. history. What you're about to hear sounds impossible, but it's all real. He was like a ghost in New York's crowded streets, the man behind one of the wildest crime sprees the city had ever seen. Thousands of luxury cars, stolen in broad daylight, vanishing without a trace. Even the FBI had no clue who was doing it or how. This guy wasn't your average thief. He was smart, careful, and way ahead of the game. This is the untold story of Min Jinyang, the mastermind who ran America's biggest car theft operation. And trust me, it's crazier than any movie plot. New York City, a place where the rich show off their shiny, expensive cars. It's the perfect hunting ground for someone like Jinyang. But here's the twist. Jinyang wasn't just a regular criminal. He came from China, where he used to work as an intelligence officer. Yeah, that's right. This guy had military training, and he used it to pull off the biggest car heist operation America had ever seen. His plan? So smart, so sneaky, that he made millions while the police couldn't catch him. The way he pulled this off will blow your mind. Buckle up, because you're about to hear a story about a crime genius who turned New York City into his playground and almost got away with it. So, how did Jinyang pull off one of the most complex car heists America had ever seen? It all started with building the perfect team. He knew he couldn't trust just anyone, so he focused on people from his own community, all Chinese nationals. It wasn't about being exclusive. It was about loyalty. These were people who shared his background and, more importantly, his language. The plan was to make the inner circle so tight that no outsider could ever get in. The next step was finding a safe place to operate from. But this wasn't going to be some obvious chop shop where stolen cars would sit around in plain view. No, Jinyang was way too clever for that. He rented a warehouse and made it look like a food storage facility. Boxes of dry and packed food lined the front of the warehouse, and everything looked perfectly legal if someone happened to peek inside. But hidden behind that innocent front was where the real magic happened. Luxury cars being prepped and disguised, ready to disappear forever. And of course, Jinyang didn't leave anything to chance. He set up a whole network of surveillance cameras around the warehouse. Every angle, every corner was covered. He even monitored the streets nearby to make sure no one was ever following them. It was like he was running his own private security operation, except the whole point was to keep the police out. Once the warehouse was set, Jinyang needed people who could actually steal the cars. Enter Dean, a guy who knew everything there was to know about car theft. He was the kind of person who could hotwire a car in seconds and bypass any security system you could think of. Jinyang found Dean at a car auction, where thieves often scoped out potential targets. He didn't need to tell Dean much. The idea of working for someone who already had buyers lined up for stolen cars? That was an offer too good to refuse. But Dean wasn't going to work alone. He had a partner named Mario Lopez, a pro at breaking into cars. Mario was the guy who did the dirty work, the one who actually got his hands on the cars. His skill was turning even the most high-tech vehicle into an easy steal, usually by connecting a laptop to the car's computer and reprogramming it. The two of them were a dream team, and with Jinyang's guidance, they became part of a machine that worked flawlessly. Everything was planned, down to the smallest detail. Jinyang gave Dean orders that filtered down to Mario and other crew members. It was like a well-rehearsed play, with everyone knowing their lines and moves. And Jinyang? He stayed in the shadows, keeping his hands clean and watching as the operation he'd built from the ground up started to make millions. Now, let's talk about how these car thefts actually went down. Mario Lopez, the guy Jinyang trusted to get the job done, was like a magician when it came to stealing cars. It wasn't just about smashing a window or breaking a lock. Mario made car theft look almost effortless. First, he'd scope out the target, usually a flashy car parked in a mall lot or outside a rich neighborhood. He'd move quickly, but not in a way that looked suspicious. He was calm, confident, and precise. Mario carried a small laptop, which was his main tool. Once he broke into the car, he connected the laptop to the vehicle's computer system. Now, you'd think these luxury cars would be impossible to steal, right? But Mario knew all the tricks. In less than a minute, he could hack the car's computer, bypass any security system, and program a regular key to start the engine. No alarms, no noise, no fuss. But the real genius of this operation wasn't just stealing the cars. It was everything that happened after. Jinyang had taught his team to be extra careful. Every stolen car had a GPS tracker, so they couldn't just drive off and hide it. Instead, they'd park the car in a busy, upscale neighborhood for a couple of days, right where no one would think twice about seeing a luxury vehicle. During that time, they'd use special equipment to scan for the tracker, pull it out, and toss it somewhere random. Only when they were 100% sure the car was clean would they move it to the warehouse. Now let's talk about what happened inside the warehouse. Remember, it was disguised as a food storage facility, so it looked boring and innocent from the outside. But behind those stacks of dry food, it was a high-tech operation. The Chinese crew Jinyang had assembled knew exactly what to do. They'd fix up the cars, making sure every scratch and dent was gone. They'd even reprogram the car's computer to give it a new identity, almost like it had never been stolen. The locks were repaired, new keys were made, and the car was cleaned up to look brand new. Then came the shipping part, and this is where Jinyang's military brain really kicked in. The cars were loaded into large shipping containers, packed tight and disguised as food shipments. They'd even create fake shipping manifests to make it look like the containers held rice or canned goods. But the real trick was how they got these cars out of the country. Instead of sending the containers directly from New York, Jinyang had them transported all the way to California. It sounds crazy, but he knew that the West Coast ports were less likely to be heavily watched for car theft. And from California, the containers were loaded onto ships. But here's the twist. The ships carrying these containers wouldn't head straight to China. Instead, they'd make a stop somewhere in the middle of the ocean, where the containers were secretly transferred to another ship. This second ship would then sail directly to China. It was a foolproof plan, one that made tracking these cars nearly impossible. To stay ahead of the cops, Jinyang had a system of decoys and constant surveillance. His team was always watching the streets around the warehouse, and he made sure no one used the same phone number for too long. They'd switch phones regularly and speak in code. Jinyang was paranoid, but for good reason. He knew one slip-up could bring everything crashing down, and for a long time, his plan worked perfectly. Cops were left scratching their heads, while Jinyang and his crew kept raking in millions, one stolen car at a time. For years, Jinyang's operation seemed untouchable. But you know how it goes. No one can be perfect forever. The whole thing started to crack when a simple mistake changed everything. It was one of those nights when Mario and his crew were out on a job. They'd planned to hit a high-end car dealership, taking off with multiple cars in just a few minutes. The plan was solid, as always, But this time, one of the thieves messed up. In the chaos of trying to drive off quickly, one of the stolen cars got into a minor accident just a couple of streets away. The police showed up, as they do when there's an accident, and things started to unravel. The driver of the stolen car panicked, and with some pressure from the cops, he cracked. He wasn't a mastermind. He was just a low-level guy in the gang. So he spilled everything he knew. He told the police about Mario, about how they stole cars, and even about the network that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. That arrest lit a fire under law enforcement. Suddenly, the New York police knew they weren't dealing with random car thefts. This was an organized crime ring, and they needed a full-scale investigation. The FBI got involved too, and a special task force was put together. But Jinyang wasn't an easy target. The police needed to be smart, so they went for the long game. They got court approval to tap phones and started following every lead they could find. The investigators were getting frustrated, though. Jinyang and his team were so good at covering their tracks. They kept changing phones, speaking in code, and watching their backs like hawks. But you know what they say? If you keep watching, eventually, you'll see something. And that's exactly what happened. Jinyang had this partner named Chia. He was one of the few people Jinyang actually trusted. But here's the thing about trust. It can be a double-edged sword. Chia got a little too comfortable, a little too sloppy. One night, he made a mistake. He mentioned the new warehouse location over the phone, not realizing the police were listening. It was a small slip, but for the investigators, it was like striking gold. The cops ramped things up. They didn't just drive around in police cars, hoping to catch something suspicious. Nope. They planted hidden surveillance cameras all around the new warehouse. They wanted eyes on everything. Who came in, who went out, and what was happening inside. It was a high-stakes game, and the tension was real. Jinyang had no idea he was being watched so closely. And just to make sure they had every angle covered, the task force planted a GPS device on one of the containers going in. Finally, for the first time, law enforcement felt like they had the upper hand. They were watching and waiting, and they knew it was only a matter of time before Jinyang made his next move. The day the police finally made their move was nothing short of chaotic. They'd been planning this raid for weeks, and when they stormed the warehouse, it was pure madness. The workers inside, some of them trusted members of Jinyang's crew, scattered like ants. They ran in every direction, trying to get away, but the place was surrounded. The cops were everywhere, yelling, guns drawn, and there was no way out. But Jinyang, he stayed calm. While everyone else was panicking, he just stood there, watching it all go down. It was almost like he knew this moment was coming. He didn't run. He didn't even flinch. When the police handcuffed him, he didn't put up a fight. He was collected, quiet, and had this look on his face that almost said, "I knew this was coming." The evidence was overwhelming. They found high-end cars ready to be shipped, tools used to hack into car computers, fake manifests, everything they needed to nail him. Still, when Jinyang got to the interrogation room, he didn't break down or plead for mercy. Instead, he confessed calmly, admitting to running the entire operation. It wasn't arrogance. It was more like he was still in control, even while being arrested. In court, things were complicated. The trial drew a lot of attention, and law enforcement wanted to make an example out of him. But Jinyang had played the game smart. He hadn't stolen cars himself or left any evidence directly tying him to the crimes. So, Despite running an operation that had stolen thousands of luxury cars and made millions of dollars, he was only sentenced to 10 years in prison. The cops were frustrated, and who could blame them? It felt like Jinyang had still come out on top. Even after he was locked up, there were so many unanswered questions. Where had all the money gone? The millions he made from the stolen cars had been moved out of the country, and no one could trace it. It was like he'd planned his own downfall just as carefully as he'd planned his crimes. To this day, no one really knows what happened to that fortune, and Jinyang never gave up his secrets. Even behind bars, he was still a step ahead. When news of Jinyang's arrest broke, it sent shockwaves through New York City. People couldn't believe how one man had managed to steal so many cars, right under everyone's noses, and for so long. The wealthy neighborhoods, where luxury cars were like status symbols, were especially shaken. It felt like no one was safe, no matter how many security measures they took. Car owners were stunned, but honestly, a lot of people were also impressed. This guy had pulled off one of the smartest, most organized heists the city had ever seen. Law enforcement wasn't just embarrassed, they were humbled. This wasn't some simple car thief they were dealing with. Jinyang had outsmarted some of the best in the business. It made them rethink how they handled car theft and organized crime. After Jinyang's operation, police departments all over the country stepped up their game. They invested in better technology and started monitoring ports and warehouses more closely. Car manufacturers even improved security systems, trying to make sure no one could ever do what Jinyang did again. But here's the question: can we ever be truly safe from masterminds like Jinyang? He was one step ahead, always thinking of the next move. And if someone like him could come out of nowhere and fool everyone for so long, who's to say it won't happen again? It makes you wonder if there are more criminal geniuses out there, just waiting for their moment. Now, before we wrap up, if you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps us out and keeps us motivated to bring you more stories like this one. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on our next video. We have another mind-blowing true crime story coming up, one that involves a heist so bold it left an entire country stunned. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.